Welcome to Ghosts of Water. I'm Sarah Hirschler. I'm the Marketing and Membership Manager at Fairmount Park Conservancy, and we bring Philly's parks to life. And one of the ways that we're bringing Philly's parks to life this month is through something called OcTOURber in Fairmount Park, which is 5 weeks of self-guided tours that span 5 themes: historic houses, public art, nature, water, and finally past and present. So each week we have been sharing out a Google map that has a self-guided route that folks can enjoy with a lot of detail. And we also mark these routes in person with some tree tape so that you don't get lost. And we also add these really awesome missions in this app called Goose Chase, which is a free app you can download. And just going to show you a couple of weeks so far of folks who've been participating on Goose Chase. This is just an example of some of the clues and the photos that result. So when folks participate and use Goose Chase and complete all the missions that we put in there, we actually are giving everybody who completes all the missions a $50 membership to Fairmount Park Conservancy. And that level membership includes a map, a park pass with discounts for use in the park, and then a whole year where you can register for free for guided hikes and other really special events that we have through the year. And that picture in the bottom right ties very well into today's discussion about water, because it's actually the ropes course at the Discovery Center. Last thing from me before we get started officially, little shout out for Love Your Park Fall Service Day, which is coming up on November 14th. We've got 70 parks participating. And we are accepting 25 volunteers at each park. We're going to have social distancing and masks and all the protective measures possible, but we really need volunteers to come out and help love their park. So you can register at loveyourpark.org and learn all the details. So without further ado, today we've got Adam Levine, who has been researching the city's water and drainage history for more than 20 years. And is the creator and webmaster of phillyh2o.org. We're going to hear from him in a moment. A couple quick housekeeping things. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll try to answer as many as we can at the very end. And finally, we will be making this webinar available online in the coming days, along with all our other webinars that we've hosted so far. So stay tuned for that link. Now I'm going to hand things over to the one and only Adam Levine.
All right. Okay. Now, hi, everyone. As Sarah introduced me, I'm Adam Levine. I've been a historical consultant for more than 20 years for the Philadelphia Water Department. And I've never really looked at the history of water in Fairmount Park. So this is a new talk created just for the Fairmount Park Conservancy. And it's also sort of a Halloween theme here, at least with the typefaces in the headlines and the little ghost I have here. I'm going to be talking about most of the things I'm going to be talking about are things that no longer exist, hence the title Ghosts of Water in the park. A lot of that is water department infrastructure, but there's also some other water features in the park that either are no longer existing, or the reason that they were created is no longer existing. So with that in brief introduction, I'll just get right into it. And the first thing I want to talk about is the Fairmount Waterworks and the water that once was all around the Fairmount Waterworks. But before I get into the water aspect of the waterworks, I just want to talk about the architectural aspect. And just to point out that what we think of this as this iconic scene in the Philadelphia architecture, with the art museum on top of the hill and the waterworks down below, it wasn't always that way. And even the buildings of the waterworks itself were not always configured in this way. The buildings were changed as the technology changed, as the need for water changed. And I'll just show you quickly, this could be an hour-long talk in itself, the history of the Fairmount Waterworks, and even just the architecture and the technology of the waterworks could be a long presentation itself, and I'm not the expert in that. So I just wanted to show you some pictures of how the site has changed over the years. On the left, you have the original Fairmount Waterworks. Fairmount was the second waterworks. Philadelphia started providing water in 1801. Fairmount was built in 1815. And that original building on the left of your slide there was housing two steam engines that pumped water up to the top of the reservoir on the top of the hill behind the building, which was called Fairmount. So then in 1819 to 1821, the Fairmount Dam was built, which allowed the waterworks to go to water power rather than unreliable steam engines. And the building on the left, the new building on the left of the original engine house was where the water wheels were. The water would come in behind the building, turn the wheels, which turn the pumps, and then pump the water up to the reservoir. And as the city grew and the need for water grew, and as technology changed, the building changed. This is an additional water wheels were built, and you can see how the building is expanded upstream. In the foreground is the lock of the Schuylkill navigation, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. In this picture, you can see that there are even more buildings on the left. This is after the water wheels were replaced by turbines, which were more efficient and could run at low tide. And that's a little bit even more technology than you need to know. Like I said, this could be a long talk just in itself. But you can also see the buildings in the background have changed. The reservoir would be up at the top here. That's the line of the reservoir. There were actually 5 different basins, 6 depending on how you divided them up. And various odd features like this arch and this standpipe. This gazebo is actually still there. And so this is not even the view of, not even the waterworks as it finally came down to us today, because here you can see all of these buildings that are sitting on the deck were not in that view. So, you know, the landscape around here has changed, the buildings have changed, and now I'll move into some of the water features of this landscape around Fairmount. And I'm going to talk about 3 of them. The first one's the reservoirs, which, as you can see here, they're divided into 6 basins. Other plans show 5 basins. They were added onto over the years. They started with 1 basin, and then they kept making the reservoir larger and larger as the need for water changed. So what happened to these reservoirs on top of this hill? And just to explain why you need a reservoir up on a hill is because you want your water to flow by gravity. And by putting the water up on one of the highest points close to Center City, which was the original city of Philadelphia, they allowed the water to flow from this high point by gravity down into the pipes that serve the needs of the people who live down in Philadelphia, without having to do any extra pumping other than pumping the water up into that high ground. So that's generally what a reservoir standpipe does. It brings the water up to a high level so it can then flow by gravity. So what happened to these reservoirs is that the art museum was built up there in the 1920s. And you can see here the footprint of the reservoirs over the dotted lines of the reservoirs, and the art museum as it exists today is below that. And Fairmount is down here. The waterworks are down here on the left. So the reservoir embankments are usually made of clay. The embankments would have been built on the bedrock that was by Fairmount was such a high point. It was a rocky outcrop. And as the clay was torn down, as the clay embankments were torn down, this is what the reservoir, not the former reservoir and now the site of the future art museum looked like. This was before they tore down these architectural features, the standpipe and what they call the distribution arch. And you can see they left the gazebo there. Here's the the framework of the art museum going up in 1921, the tiny, by comparison to the size of the art museum, the waterworks were tiny, especially when you have this thing looming over it on the hill. But here, and you can see that they've leveled out not just the flat area where they're building the building, but they've leveled out what were steep embankments on either side of the reservoir. And here's the art museum built the 1930s aerial view, looking down the very young Benjamin Franklin Parkway with hardly any trees. You can barely see the trees. They've hardly grown up at this point. The parkway would have been only about 10 years old at this point. And a lot of the buildings that we know along the parkway are not there yet. So I was talking about the embankments and how the embankments were fairly steep. And you can see here, this is a view looking on the north side of the Fairmount Reservoir. And you can see the steep embankments. And I love these old photographs. You can zoom in and you can see all the people on this nice sunny day streaming into Fairmount Park. This would have been sometime in the 1890s this photograph was taken. So this steep embankment was leveled out as the reservoir embankments were torn down, probably filled in with the material that they were tearing out of the reservoir embankment, filled in with that clay, at least in some parts. And you can see they left, as those of you remember before they built the parking garage over here on the left, there were a lot of rocks that were piled up and rough walls, and I think that was some remnants of the reservoir as well, although I'm not sure. This is a view looking south at the north entrance of the art museum from the Italian fountain, which is in the foreground here, probably from the 1920s or 30s. So the second water feature that is now missing from the Fairmount Waterworks is what was called the forebay. The dam was built and completed in 1821, partly to provide water for the Schuylkill navigation, which I'll talk about in a minute, but also to provide water for the waterworks. And the dam backed up a 6-mile lake behind it, all the way up almost to Manayunk, and which allowed navigation by barges just on this flat lake, and also provided water. The raised water was diverted into the forebay, which flowed behind what they called the mill houses, and as the water fell through those buildings down to the lower level of the water below the dam, it then powered the water wheels and later turbines and allows the water to be pumped up to the reservoir by that water power. So here's a picture of the forebay, and you can see here one other feature that's missing that I'm not really going to talk about. It probably could be another fairly hefty talk, just talking about the steamboats and the parks and the play and other features related to the steamboats that used to go up and down the river to visit various parks and various beer gardens and things. There was a steamboat landing right at the end of the forebay, and here's the water flowing in underneath what was called the raised bridge. These pipes would have been carrying the water from the pumps up to the reservoir. There were, I think, 8 of them. The valves here would have been controlling the gates of the flow of the water into the turbines. And so this is what this ended up looking like. As the art museum was being built, they probably took some of that clay out of the embankments and used it to fill in the forebay. And one interesting thing here is the balustrade is completely gone in this picture, except for down at this far end, the balustrade that now surrounds the Soul site. If someone is listening who has some information on that, I think part of it was restored in the 1980s, and a lot of the balustrade is actually newly built, newly fabricated. You can see here not only were they filling in the forebay, but they were dredging away the silt that had accumulated behind the dam, and that silt accumulates behind any dam, but especially in the Schuylkill at Fairmount, there was a lot of coal waste washing down the river in high water, and it still accumulates above the dam. So here they're dredging away what now has become sort of a fixture of that area, the silt island, I call it. I know that's not what other people call it, but I consider it a silt island, and I wish that it hadn't been made permanent. In my opinion, the site looked much prettier with the arc of with the arc of this nice curving around the boathouses and then down there, rather than being blocked by the island. But nobody asked my opinion when they did this work, so that's just how it goes. So one of the water department historical consultants named Leonard Punt, did a series of photographs. He's been fascinated by the waterworks. He's now finishing up the history of the waterworks. And for about probably close to 20 years, he's been photographing the Fairmount site. And he managed to match up some old pictures with new pictures, basically finding the exact same angle. And so these are just the 3 pairs of pictures that show the forebay and how it's changed over the years. So you can see that this is the left side is the end of the forebay, and the water again would flow from the forebay down through the buildings on the left and then down into the river below. And here's the after picture. Now it's a parking lot for the Fairmount Waterworks Interpretive Center, the Water Department's Watershed Education Center. Another view again showing the steamboat, with the paddle wheel in the background, showing the race bridge and the beautiful architecture of that, which is now basically buried underneath the parking lot. And a third view is showing the dramatic curve along the wall of the forebay, with the gazebo at the end of the dam up on the upper left. And this again has become just a grassy area, which is well-used grassy area, but not water anymore. So the third and last water feature of the Fairmount site is across the river, the lock that was used by the Schuylkill navigation system. It was the last piece of the system. The Fairmount, the Schuylkill navigation ran 115 miles from up in Schuylkill County in the coal country, and was able, by a series of canals and locks and dams, to bring boats all the way down about 550, lowering them 515 feet in elevation total by the various locks, and bringing them down to tidewater. That's at the Schuylkill River. Below the dam, the Schuylkill is tidal. So what happened to the locks? Here's a picture of the locks, probably about 1840. This is the outlet lock below the dam, and after the boats have been lowered down through the locks down to the level of the river below, showing yet another configuration of the waterworks, and a different bridge there, of course, the Wormwag Bridge, the wooden bridge. Here's the inlet lock coming from above the dam. So this water would have been at the level above the river above the dam. The water would have come in, and you would have come through the lock, gotten into the lock at that level, and then the water would have been let out slowly, and your boat would have been lowered down to the level of the river below. And then you would go out the lock and you'd go on your way. This is a picture from 1940 of the lock tender's house on the left, and you can see that this was well lived in. There's laundry hanging out there on the line, and the toll house, the toll keepers, the toll house where the tolls were collected for the boats that were traveling through the locks. The Schuylkill navigation was almost from the beginning, from the 1830s anyway, competing with railroads, and it lost that competition with the railroads not long after the Civil War, and the canal system continued to decline. It was subject to flooding and damage from ice, and so eventually I think it was the last boat ran through it in 1917. Again, the history of this is a wonderful historian who works for the Water Department, whose name slips my mind now, Sandy Sorlian, who could give you a wonderful talk and actually walking tour of this site. But so the locks were filled in when the Schuylkill Expressway was built. To build the Schuylkill Expressway, the river drive along the west bank of the river had to be moved out of the way. So they filled in the locks and also filled in a lot of land along the river. Here's a picture of the sort of the first part of this, as they've removed the lower part of the lock. And you can see here that this line of the river drive is over where the lock would have been, and then they built the Schuylkill Expressway between that and the railroad. So there was some filling of the river done there below the dam, and that was the end of the lock. There's still locks in Manayunk. Of course, the Manayunk Canal is still there, and as you go farther upstream, there are other remnants of locks and canals that you can see. So the ghost pumping stations. This is the 1867 Farm and Lots map of Fairmount Park, which showed all the land that was purchased for the original purchase of Fairmount Park on both sides of the Schuylkill River. And in the detail of this, you can see that above the Fairmount Basin, the Fairmount Waterworks down in the bottom right, that within a mile upriver, there were two more waterworks that opened up after Fairmount. And the first one we'll talk about is the West Philadelphia Waterworks here, which was supplying water to West Philadelphia. Obviously, it's also called the 24th Ward Waterworks because that was the ward that covered all of West Philadelphia. And this was a very romantic view taken probably sometime around 1860, 1870 from the east side of the river, looking over to the west to this little building. It wasn't so little when you get close to it. You can see it's a pumping station that had its steam engine. The smokestack is behind the building. And this is the standpipe. It didn't have a reservoir. It was pumping water up to the top of this tubular column. And then the water would, once it was up there, was allowed to fall by gravity down and flow into the pipe system that was servicing the houses and businesses of West Philadelphia. It was designed by two engineers, Birkenbein and Trotter. And I have a feeling, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that this is Birkenbein and Trotter. We don't know which one is which. But this is a picture from a signed picture, probably done shortly after this waterworks was completed. And I have a feeling that the way these men are dressed and the way they're posing in front of this building, that they were actually the two who created it. Birkenbein became a chief engineer of the Philadelphia Water Department after the Civil War. But this waterworks was built in 1855. Just another half of the stereo view showing the building just from a slightly different angle. So where was this located? If you take this map that's a report of the Philadelphia Zoo and overlay it, you can see the blue arrow points at the forebay of this waterworks, where the water would have been allowed to, sediment would have been allowed to settle out before they pumped it up into the standpipe. You can see the bird lake of the zoo right above that. And if you take a current aerial photograph of the zoo, and then if you do a little tinkering in Photoshop, which it takes a little maneuvering and stretching and rotating, but you can then line these two things up, and you can see that the waterworks was right below where the zoo is, right above, more or less above 34th Street. And one thing you can see on this, and here's the Martin Luther King Drive on the west side of the river, which was built out over the river to accommodate the expressway, which is between the park and the river drive. And you can see all the fill that has been done over all the filling that has been done over the years. Even if this alignment in this older map is even partly accurate, you can see that the riverfront was much farther inland than it is today. And it makes sense that there was a lot of filling done to accommodate the roads along the river. So the other ghost waterworks is the Spring Garden Waterworks. This is a picture of what was originally called the Northern Liberties and Spring Garden Pumping Station, but later just became known by the second municipality that it was serving. This was built before 1854 when the city was consolidated. The entire county of Philadelphia with 29 municipal entities was absorbed into a much larger city of Philadelphia, and Spring Garden was one of the districts before consolidation. And this was a waterworks that was built to serve that district. And it expanded greatly over time. You can see on the right toward the river the fenced-in forebay, and that forebay, this building is set way back at the end of the forebay, but as this system was absorbed into the city system after consolidation, it kept growing and growing. So here's the location of this. I almost don't need to show the map. I'm going to show in a minute. It was right next to where the tunnel is on the Kelly Drive, right between Girard Avenue and what now is the main line of the Amtrak line. A beautiful set of buildings. Here's a view looking from the river at the intakes, and the forebay would be over here, and more pumping stations and boiler houses over here. This is all steam waterworks. The only water-powered works in the entire water department history was at Fairmount. All the rest have been steam engines. And in the background of this picture, you can see Brewery Town, some of the breweries of Brewery Town. And if this standpipe looks familiar, it's because it was actually moved once the West Philadelphia Waterworks was abandoned in 1870, when a new waterworks was built on the west side of the river, which I'll talk about in a bit. The standpipe was dismantled and reassembled on the east side of the river to service the Spring Garden Waterworks. Here's a picture of the pumping station. Inside the pumping station, one of the buildings anyway, showing a few of the pumps. Here's a picture in 1921 after this waterworks had basically been abandoned, and probably shortly before it was demolished. So where was this waterworks? It's probably, those of you who know the park well probably know where it was. But here's a schematic diagram showing all the various components of it, with all these different buildings and housing either boilers or pumps, and all the pipes leading from those pumps, into various reservoirs or various parts of the system, the water system. So it's the Glendenning Rock Garden, basically between Girard Avenue and the railroad, is where this site was wedged in. And here you can see, by overlaying these maps, where it sat in that. And I thought I've never thought I'm the only one who's interested in this, but it surprised me when I was doing the research for this talk that I discovered that this guy, Jacob Smith, who has a YouTube channel, has actually done a little video. He's actually explored this site more than I have. I've never really been on the ground here looking for remnants of these buildings, but I haven't looked at this video yet, but I would love to go visit this site with Jacob Smith, or with anybody who might know what some of the artifacts that exist along that cliff on the left are. A lot of times I end up doing a lot of work in archives, and it's actually a joy when I actually get out to go and see some of the sites that I think I know so well, to actually see what they look like today. So the ghost reservoirs. Spring Garden Waterworks had a reservoir at 26th and Massey Street that has now become the Athletic Square Park and Rec Center. is on that property. The reservoir, once that pumping station was abandoned, the reservoir was embankments were torn down, the same as the Fairmount Reservoir, and it became since it was already city property, it became a park and later a rec center. The Fairmount Waterworks actually had a secondary reservoir, the Corinthian Avenue Reservoir, which you can see here on this map, was wedged between Girard College and this wagon wheel is probably familiar to some of you as the footprint of Eastern State Penitentiary. And we don't have any pictures of the Spring Garden Reservoir, but we do have pictures of this Corinthian Reservoir. And here's a picture taken from probably the roof of Girard College, looking at the penitentiary here in the background, and here's the reservoir. And so when Fairmount was decommissioned in 1909, this reservoir was flattened out, like, well, not right away. I'm getting ahead of myself here. You know, even just this little watch box, which is basically a little guardhouse on the reservoir, was just the beautiful architectural details and the terracotta roof tiles and the flue tiles and the little, I guess you call that a finial up there. Just the details of little simple architectural features like that of so much of the public works of the late 19th, early 20th century is just sort of astounding and irreplaceable, because the cost of that just to reproduce that would be astronomical today, which is why we have cinder blocks and glass. Here's a picture from 1912 showing the reservoir. And someone who knew the neighborhood better than I do could probably tell you which way we're looking by the church spires in the background. But in 1924, this reservoir, I guess, just sat there unused until 1924, when the city finally sold it off. You can see the price here, $206,500, and 218 new homes were built on the footprint of the reservoir. And so if you ever walk up from Eastern State Penitentiary up toward Girard College, and you basically walk from a 19th century neighborhood, and when you hit the footprint of this reservoir, you hit a 20th century 1920s neighborhood. And it seems a little weird. You wonder what was happening. Maybe there was a fire, or you just wonder what happened there. And until you know that there was a reservoir there, it doesn't really make sense. So the East Park Reservoir is now in the process of being reconfigured in a number of ways. The remaining basins that the water department owns are being outfitted with water storage tanks, which are more secure and more in tune with what the needs of the current population of the city are. In the West Basin, where I'm pointing more or less at the entrance across from the Smith Playground on Reservoir Drive, has now finally, after being abandoned since the 1970s, has been turned over to Fairmount Park, to the Philadelphia Parks and Recreation, and it's become the Discovery Center. So this is not a view of a lake in the Poconos, although it could be. This is actually what they now call the Strawberry Mansion Reservoir, and it was a project. The Discovery Center is a project of Audubon, Pennsylvania. Here's some of the staff posing as bird watchers. They all are bird watchers, but they're posing here for the photographer. And then the ropes course that's part of the Outward Bound, Philadelphia Outward Bound School, which is a partner with the Audubon PA and the Discovery Center. They also have an indoor rock wall, and both of the organizations have offices in the building. So it's a really nice example of reusing city infrastructure in a creative way. So Belmont Pumping Station is not a ghost pumping station. It's a different version of it, not this exact building, but a different version of it still sits on Martin Luther King Drive, near where Montgomery Avenue goes over the river. And here's a view of the current reservoir, which really is a sedimentation basin. The pumping station pumps water up to City Avenue near Belmont Avenue, and the water settles. And I've always wondered what this. For years, I didn't know what this lake was up on City Avenue, and I thought it had something to do with the hotel. But then I started working for the water department, and I realized what it was. But I often wondered what the hotel visitors think, and I thought maybe it might look pleasant to them, but actually, if you see this view, this was taken by a hotel visitor in 2018 and posted on Google Earth. It really does look like water infrastructure. It has two basins. The sediment from the river settles to the bottom, and then the clear water off the top is drawn into the Belmont filtration plant, where it's filtered and then stored underground and eventually piped into the distribution system. But before the filtration system was built in the early 20th century, this reservoir pumped water up to this Belmont pumping station, Belmont Waterworks, pumped water up to a reservoir on just behind the Mann Music Center on George's Hill, which was one of the high points of West Philadelphia. And this is a map from 1910 showing that reservoir. And here's the Google map. And again, I'll show you how I built this out. So I go from this Google map to then going to the Google satellite view, and still you don't see any remnant of a reservoir in that satellite view. But you know, I have my sources, and here's a footprint of that reservoir, where it would have sat just on the hill above the Mann Music Center, and then above Belmont Avenue also. This reservoir held about 40 million gallons, and it was 212 feet above the mean high tide of the Delaware River, which is how Philadelphia elevations are measured, not by sea level, but by the high tide of the Delaware River. But it meant that any buildings below the reservoir, lower than 212 feet, could be serviced by this. But there were buildings higher up that couldn't be served. So the reservoir actually had a pumping station, which is indicated by this whole little schematic here, that pumped water from the reservoir up into a standpipe that was 364 feet high. So that could then, they call these pumping stations high service pumping stations, because they're basically not pumping into the system, but they're pumping up the standpipes that then can flow by gravity, the water from the top of the standpipe, and then flow by gravity into the pipes at elevations higher than this reservoir. So there's still remnants of this, and I thank a guy named Hugh Waddles for showing me this long time ago. I was going to write something about it and never did, and this is about 8 years ago. But he took me into the woods, and basically you have to sort of bushwhack in to see the remnants of the old pumping station, the high service pumping station. And there really is not a whole lot left of it. The smokestack's torn down. But as you wander around these woods, the reservoir embankment is still clearly there. Some of the fencing is still there. And then in the front here, what is called the gatehouse, you know, there was this very, very fancy structure with a lot of architectural details that are now scattered around down the hillside that came down from the top of the embankment. And we do have some pictures of this. So here's the picture. Here's a picture of the gatehouse, and you can see again the urns, the planted urns here at the gatehouse of the George's Hill Reservoir. That's not a feature that the water department. If we have anything planted, we have rain gardens to try to capture stormwater now. We don't usually plant urns to decorate our reservoirs anymore. And here's some pictures from probably about 1876 showing the George's Hill Reservoir. These were taken as probably associated with a series of pictures of the Centennial Exhibition, which was opened that year in West Fairmount Park. And you can see the gatehouse would have been right around here, and this reservoir, like all the reservoirs in the city, would have had a promenade around it. You could go up there and walk around in the fresh air and get the views from that embankment. Here's another view showing that embankment, which is now completely, this entire block is now completely wooded, and the reservoir has been filled in by various kinds of debris. So here's a picture of the Centennial buildings from 1876. You can see the arrow points at the Georges Hill Reservoir, but it was not really part of the exhibition. It was part of the city's water system that just happened to be in the view of this artist. And it appears in a lot of views of the Centennial, but the water department was worried as the Centennial got closer that the city had enough trouble supplying water for its own growing population, let alone for the millions of visitors who were going to be coming to visit the Centennial. So because of that worry, the Centennial built its own water system, water pumping station anyway, and standpipe. But before I talk about that, I want to talk about this feature, a lake, the Centennial Lake, that was, along with Lansdowne Creek, was an integral part of the landscape of the Centennial grounds. So here's a picture in 1910 after the Centennial. You can still see some of the buildings of the Centennial, the Horticulture Hall here, a Memorial Hall here, and then some other scattered buildings. Here's the Georges Hill Reservoir. And then you have this lake. That was the Centennial Lake. This lake is a lake that I believe was built after the Machinery Hall was torn down after the Centennial exhibition. Possibly there was a big depression from the basement of that building. Possibly it filled with water and they left it as a lake, or maybe they were more intentional. I'm not sure of the history of that. Someone who knows the Centennial grounds better would know that. But so now you have these two lakes, and still the creek flowing downhill. Here's a wide Google view showing the remaining Strawberry Mansion Reservoir over here on the right. And then over here is the Centennial Lake. Concourse Lake is what this is called. But what Google often doesn't include is streams. Just be aware that Google is not very good, even in suburban areas, but especially in urban areas, to show any streams that might still exist. So by overlaying the water department's just stream layer of its mapping system, I was able to show that these are still the streams that still exist in this system. So you have a stream leading into Concourse Lake and then leading out of it all the way down to the Schuylkill. Then up just north of where the Belmont pumping station is, there's another stream leading up into the park. And there are other streams in the park. But I'm not going to be talking about these streams and the different fates of them, because that's something I don't know enough about and I need to do more exploration of. But I just wanted to show it in this particular case, just to maybe point out one of the flaws of Google. Google has many flaws, many problems, causes many problems, but that's not for this talk. So here's a Google close-up of Centennial Lake and Concourse Lake. And again, Google makes all these water features look blue. Well, sometimes the Schuylkill River runs brown, and in the summertime, these lakes are often covered with algae, because although Centennial Lake in particular has a stream running out of it, often there's probably not a whole lot of flow when it's hot and when things are dry. So there could be some restoration work done with these lakes and some cleaning up. Maybe there has been that I'm not aware of. I apologize if I'm overstepping my commentary here. So these next few pictures are part of an incredible collection at the Free Library of Philadelphia print and picture collection. These are all online. I did not get any special access to any high resolution photos of these images. I just zoomed in on the pictures that are already on the Free Library website and was able to grab these pictures of Centennial Lake. Interesting thing about this is looking north toward Georges Hill, and you can see that white line, which looks almost like it was drawn in there, was actually the white picket fence around the embankment. the reservoir. Um, Here's Machinery Hall, which was one of the, I think, other than the main building of the Centennial, the second largest building. You can see the monumental size of this. And you can see how possibly removing that building would have left a depression in the ground and then resulted in the concourse lake that I showed a minute ago. Just another view looking probably from the embankment of Georges Hill Reservoir down toward the lake. You can see the fountain that's in the center of the lake. And this little lake here, this little pond, which would have been flowing out of Centennial Lake into that pond, and then you can see the stream flowing off to the left of the picture. That's where the Japanese Shokutsu, the Japanese house and garden is. And I'm sorry if I'm just repeating in my commentary the captions that I've already put on the slides. And finally, just one more view, again, looking sort of north up Belmont Avenue, and then with the Georges Hill Reservoir on the left. Well, one more view. And these pictures, and any of these pictures, I know sometimes I go through these pictures fast, but remember that this will be posted online, and you'll be able to stop the video and examine these pictures, or even go to the originals on the Free Library website and zoom in on them yourself. But there's so many details in these, it's just hard to know sometimes where to stop talking about them. So the one more ghost pumping station would be the Centennial Waterworks, which the arrow here points to that. It was along the Schuylkill River. It was it was downstream from the Belmont Waterworks. Here's a close-up of that same map showing the engine house, which is the Centennial Waterworks. It had no reservoir. It wasn't pumping water to the Georges Hill Reservoir. That was for the Belmont pumping station. This pumping station, the Centennial pumping station, was pumping up to a standpipe up on the exhibition grounds. And from that standpipe, which is indicated, this blue line, if you follow the blue line to the right, you'll see the standpipe here. That was what got the water pressure needed for the water to flow from up in that standpipe down into the grounds, and probably fed a lot of the fountains and other water features on the grounds of the Centennial. This is a picture, an engraving of the pumping station, which was designed by Frederick Graff Jr., who was the son of Frederick Graff, who was basically from the beginning of the Philadelphia water system in 1801 until 1847, was more or less its chief architect and engineer. Designed a lot of the buildings and a lot of the systems, the technological systems used in the buildings. And it's possible that that's the standpipe behind the buildings, or that also could be one of the tall sculptures on the Centennial grounds. You can see that even this building itself had a fountain. And this is one of the major water features in the Centennial, the Centennial building, the Cataract and Machinery Hall. And you can see why, with all this water spewing about, that the city itself didn't want to use its own drinking water system to supply these kind of fountains, and sort of, in some ways frivolous, or not frivolous, beautiful, just for sheer pleasure. The city had enough trouble, as I said, supplying water, especially in the summertime, for its own citizens, let alone to just sort of spray it about and waste it in this way. And this particular feature at the Centennial was one of the things that inspired a very young child. Pierre Dupont, as a child, was inspired by the way the water was thrown about at the Centennial. And when he created Longwood Gardens out in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, in the first, I think by the 1920s, early in the 19th century, but early in the 20th century. But then when he got around to building his water features, he said he was inspired by this, and this is what the now restored water main fountain garden in Longwood looks like. So it's, you can see how he took that inspiration, and being one of the wealthiest men in America, was able to really do it up in a big way. This is no backyard fountain we're talking about here. So one more sort of mystery, or just, it's not so much a ghost feature. It's just a feature in the park, one of many features, I'm sure, but this is just one that happened to come to my attention earlier this year. The Reading Railroad Dam, which is in this area. This is sort of the northern, or the north, one of the northern edges of the park. City Avenue is off as the double lane road here to the right. But between Neal Drive, off of Neal Drive, the water department has a sewage pumping station. It actually takes sewage from the presidential apartments and pumps it over the various ridges to get it down where it can flow by gravity into a sewer along the Schuylkill River, and then it flows down from there to sewage treatment plants along the Delaware River. But it needs to be pumped over those hills, over those rises. And as the water department is working on redoing this pumping station, and they discovered this dam with a pipe coming out of it. It's the stream that flows down through that valley we were just looking at, no longer goes behind this dam. This dam is all silted up. There's another view of it. But the question became, what do we need to save this dam? Was the question the water department engineers said. They said that if they could move the dam, they could reroute the stream and possibly, make the stream a little bit more secure from flooding out the pumping station. At least that's, maybe I might be getting that wrong. When I start talking about engineering, some of the engineers sometimes roll their eyes at me and tell me to stick to the history. So I'll just stick to history here. This dam is here. What was it? So they showed me this plan from 1951 that shows the various sewers running through this area and the pumping station. And here's the dam. And from the dam, you can see that there's a dotted line, and it says it's called the Reading Company Dam, and then the existing 6-inch water pipe of the Reading Company is flowing downhill from the dam. So what was this dam for? So I did a little intuiting at first. Here's the 1938 topo map of Fairmount Park. Here's the dam here. And here's down here is the Reading Company West Falls rail yard, where locomotives would come to be. Steam locomotives needed to have water to make steam, and burning coal to make steam to make power. Same way a steam engine and the various waterworks need water just in the boilers. So I assumed that pipe that was coming from that dam was leading down to this rail yard. And here's some of the details of the water tanks and other things. But there was no proof of this, at least I couldn't find any, but I happen to know through my research, I've met a number of railroad historians. And so I contacted them, and they knew the premier historian, Rick Bates, who's the premier historian for the Reading Railroad Company. And so he knew all about this dam and this pipe. He had records from the Hagley Museum and Library in Wilmington. And so sure enough, the tanks were being supplied by a gravity flow from Fairmount Park Reservoir, they called it. So ultimately, it was decided that these dams, because they might still be owned by the railroad, and should just be left alone. So the original design for reconfiguring the Neal Drive pumping station was left as it is. So I've been sitting here talking to my screen for a while, and I'm just about done. I just want to say that there's a lot out there in Fairmount Park. There's still streams flowing through. There are various amazing architectural features, like this bridge, which was part of the Fairmount Park trolley, which itself is worth a talk like this and a walking tour or something. there's a lot of things, and just having done this research and I've even just doing this talk, I was doing research basically up until half an hour ago, and adding to it, and just so I have a lot to learn, and there's a lot to see out in the park. So I'm looking forward to being able to get back out into the park and actually maybe find new things to talk about. So thank you all. You can visit my website, www.phillyh2o.org. On that website is my email. Feel free to contact me with any questions. And I will stop sharing my screen now, and we'll see if there are any questions right at the moment.
Thank you so much, Adam. We had a couple questions. One earlier on was somebody asking about, maybe in general, where are some of your best resources for finding historical photos?
That's when I started doing research for the water department in 1998. That's basically one of the things I was looking for, was historic photos. City Archives has a lot of old photos. The Philly History site is a little tricky to use sometimes, but there are a lot of photos. You can't really see them at high resolution, but you can at least see that they exist, that the photos exist. And then maybe if, once the world opens it back up again. The Library Company of Philadelphia has an amazing collection of photos. The Historical Society of Pennsylvania, and the water department itself, we have thousands of photographs that were taken around 1900 and some before, that I've been collecting, and people before me, before I came, were collecting, especially of the Fairmount waterworks. But more and more, even small collections just keep getting added to the web. So it's almost like you have to keep searching, because things just keep popping up, especially with maps too. It's the same thing.
Thank you. We also had a question wondering if you had any insight on, I guess, what was once a beautiful ornate fountain at 33rd and Dauphin in East Fairmount Park.
No, it's the short answer. I'm trying to pick 33rd and Dauphin, which is it near? It's near the East Park Reservoir, or is it?
Yeah, it's really like right across from that SEPTA bus kind of bus hub across the way.
It might have been a fountain associated with the East Park Reservoir. It could have just been a fountain as a decoration for that part of the park. I'm not sure.
Okay. And then we had somebody who asked the main reason for abandoning certain waterworks in Philly over the years, and was the advancement of technology making it too costly to keep updating them, or was it to expand the real estate market and replace the waterworks with city infrastructure?
The reason the Fairmount and the Spring Garden waterworks were abandoned was because the water filtration, I give a whole talk on water filtration and why that was needed. But basically, we were pumping untreated water into the system, and we were killing a lot of people with diseases like typhoid fever. So in the early 20th century, in 1901, the city finally, after knowing about this for years, 10 years at least, and killing thousands of people in the process, decided to install filtration plants to filter the water and to take the bacteria out that was causing disease. So you can see how the way the Spring Garden waterworks is wedged into that little Glendenning rock, what's now the rock garden. You can see that there would be no room for filters, which actually take up many acres to filter the water, the amount of water that was necessary. So there was no room there. Fairmount, there's some question whether there was no room there, or whether the city really wanted to put the art museum on top of that. So that was maybe a secondary reason why the Fairmount Waterworks was abandoned at that point. Was one, because there was not a lot of room for filters, and probably because to buy the land for filters would have been much more expensive than to buy it in other places where they did build filters. And two, because they knew from even before the waterworks was abandoned that that would be a great place at the end of the Benjamin Franklin Parkway to build an art museum. So as a focal point from City Hall.
And then somebody asked if an individual block is able to determine which reservoir its water comes from. For example, a block in Spring Garden West.
Yeah, I can't answer that off the top of my head, but but yes, there are distribution paths that the water takes, and I assume that this question is being asked because there's some problem with the water. So if that's the case, or whatever the case is, if I'm not being specific enough, feel free to email me with a more detailed question or complaint, and I can refer it on to the appropriate people who can answer the question.
Great. And then I think we just have two more. One was somebody mentioned that they saw the words Fairmount listed as two words on the map, and just wondering about that. At what point was it two words? Do you have any information on that?
I think in the beginning of up until probably the middle of the 19th century, or the 1810s or 1820s, I'm not sure, but it's called both things. Before the Fairmount Waterworks, it's usually two words, and then it sort of overlaps. But like so many things, it's just easier to remove that E. Sometimes it's even spelled Fairmount with an E with two words, F-A-I-R-E, Mount, which is more a Quaker or an old-fashioned type spelling. But by the middle of the 19th century, that two words is gone, and it's just Fairmount. And just so we're clear too, waterworks in the Fairmount Waterworks and in the Philadelphia water system is always two words. It's, that's just how it's always been from Fairmount to now, and that's just been the standard. But also, it's the same reason that Cobb's Creek, a lot of these creeks that would have been hyphenated, Cobb, Mr. Cobb's Creek, the hyphens are dropped over time. Just sort of laziness on the part of people writing them or putting them, typing them out or something.
And then one more question. It's a pretty big one. A lot of progress has been made over the years to create more sustainable water management strategies in Philly. Looking forward, how can we design smarter, more integrated and resilient water management systems for the city while keeping in mind equity and justice for the community?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I agree. That wasn't a question, that was a statement. But the water department is definitely, and what we're talking about with water management systems, it's not so much the water system, which is what I've been talking about, but the drainage system, sewers and the stormwater drainage. And that's where the green stormwater infrastructure comes in. That the water department is trying to not do what cities like Chicago have done and to control combined sewer overflows. Some cities are building huge reservoirs of sewage outside the city and then sending it to the sewage treatment plant. There's a lot on the water department website, Philly H2O, it's philly.gov/water. I think you can find a lot more about the Green City Clean Waters on that. But there definitely is a component of that whole program, which is underway for about 10 years, and it's probably going to take another 15 years to reach its completion. That is aiming to improve neighborhoods and not just control overflows, but to, in the process of greening neighborhoods, to prevent stormwater from entering the sewers, which causes the overflows, improve the neighborhoods with the green infrastructure that we're building in various places. And that's, you know, you could, there are, you know, that's like a seminar, that's like a symposium could be held on that question. But I appreciate the thought behind it, and I understand the need for thinking that way.
All right, well, I think that's all we've got. Thank you so much again, Adam. This was really great. And to anyone who's still watching, we are going to share this link probably in the next day or so. So stay tuned for that. So thanks again, and have a good week, everybody.
Thank you.